I never thought my own daughter would leave me bleeding on the floor at her wedding. There I was, 65 years old, lying on that cold marble ballroom floor at the Ritz-Carlton, my heart medication failing me at the worst possible moment. Through my blurred vision, I watched 200 elegant guests stare down at me with a mixture of shock and annoyance. But what broke my heart wasn't the fall or the pain shooting through my chest. It was seeing my daughter Sarah, in her pristine white dress, looking directly at me with those eyes I'd loved since the day she was born. Our gazes met for just 1 second. Then she turned away and walked off, leaving me there like a piece of trash that had ruined her perfect day. Let me tell you how we got there, because none of this makes sense without understanding what Sarah and I used to mean to each other. When her mother Margaret died from cancer 12 years ago, Sarah was just 16, and I became everything to her. Father, mother, best friend, you name it. I was 43 then, working construction for Henderson Brothers, and suddenly I was raising a teenage girl all by myself. Those were the hardest years of my life, but also some of the most precious. I'd get up at 5 in the morning, make Sarah breakfast, drive her to school, then head to whatever job site needed me. I worked double shifts constantly, sometimes staying on a project until midnight just to bring in extra money. See, I had big dreams for Sarah. She was brilliant, getting straight A's without even trying, and I knew she could go places I never could. I sacrificed everything for her education. When she wanted to go to St. Mary's Prep instead of the local public school, I took on a second job doing weekend renovation work. The tuition was $8,000 a year, which might as well have been $80,000 on my salary, but I made it work. I stopped going out with friends, stopped dating entirely, and basically lived like a monk so Sarah could have every opportunity. When she got accepted to Northwestern University, I was so proud I cried right there in our kitchen. The full cost was going to be over $200,000 for 4 years, but I didn't care. I took out loans, worked 3 jobs, and even sold Margaret's wedding ring and jewelry collection. That ring had been in my family for 3 generations, but Sarah's future mattered more than any piece of metal. College was followed by law school at Northwestern too, another $150,000. I was 58 by then. My back was shot from all the construction work, and I was taking heart medication because of the stress and long hours. But seeing Sarah graduate law school and get hired by Morrison, Bradley, and Associates, one of Chicago's top law firms, made every sacrifice worth it. She looked so professional in her sharp business suits, driving that new BMW she bought with her first bonus. We'd have dinner every Sunday at Romano's Italian restaurant, her treat, and she'd tell me about her cases and her colleagues. I was so proud to be her father. She'd introduce me to her friends as the man who made all this possible, and I felt like the richest guy in Chicago. When Sarah announced her engagement to Brandon Whitmore 2 years ago, I thought our story was reaching its perfect ending. Brandon came from money, old Connecticut money, but he seemed like a decent guy who genuinely loved my daughter. His family owned investment firms and country clubs, the kind of people I'd only seen in movies, but they welcomed Sarah with open arms. Planning the wedding became our joint project. Sarah wanted everything perfect, and I wanted to give her the fairy tale wedding her mother never got to plan. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom cost $18,000 just for the venue. The dress was $6,000. Catering for 200 guests was another $25,000. Flowers, photography, music, decorations. It all added up to numbers that made my head spin. I had maybe $15,000 in savings, so I took out a home equity loan against the house Margaret and I had bought 30 years ago. $50,000 borrowed against the only thing I truly owned, but it was for Sarah's happiness. I figured I could work a few more years, pay it off, and retire knowing I'd given my daughter the perfect start to her new life. But 3 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. I was at Sarah's apartment helping her address invitations when she went into her bedroom to take a phone call. She thought I couldn't hear her, but the walls were thin, and her voice carried. "Brandon, I'm serious. We need to talk about the wedding logistics," she was saying. "I'm getting really anxious about your family meeting my dad. I mean, I love him, but he's so blue-collar, you know? He's going to show up in some cheap suit from Men's Warehouse and start talking about construction projects with your father who owns half of Connecticut." There was a pause. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but genuine amusement. "No, you're right, it is kind of embarrassing. I've worked so hard to build this professional image, and then there's my dad with his work boots and his stories about pouring concrete. Your mother is going to take one look at him and wonder what the hell you're doing marrying the daughter of a construction worker." My hand froze on the invitation I was addressing. This was my Sarah, my little girl, who used to brag to everyone about how hard her daddy worked. "I've been thinking we should minimize his presence as much as possible," she continued. "Seat him at a back table with some of my old neighbors, not with your family. And maybe I can coach him on what to talk about and what not to talk about. The last thing I need is him embarrassing me in front of the partners from my firm." I sat there listening to my daughter discuss me like I was a problem to be managed, an embarrassment to be hidden. The girl I'd worked myself half to death for was ashamed of the man who'd made her success possible. When she came back into the living room, I was still addressing invitations like nothing had happened. She kissed my forehead and said, "Thanks for helping, Dad. You're the best." I just smiled and nodded. But something fundamental had broken inside me that day. The wedding day arrived on a perfect October afternoon. I'd spent $200 on a new suit from Macy's, got my hair cut, and even bought new shoes that pinched my feet but looked respectable. When I picked Sarah up at the bridal suite, she looked absolutely stunning. For a moment, seeing her in that flowing white dress with Margaret's pearl necklace, I forgot all about that phone conversation. "Ready to walk your daughter down the aisle, Dad?" she asked, straightening my tie. "I've been ready for this since the day you were born," I told her, and I meant it. The ceremony was beautiful. St. Michael's Church was packed with 200 guests, half of them Brandon's family and their country club friends. As we walked down that long aisle together, I felt every eye on us, but for once, I didn't feel out of place. This was my moment too. I was giving away my most precious gift to someone who would love and protect her. When the priest asked who gives this woman in marriage, I said, "Her mother and I do," in a voice that carried throughout the church. Sarah squeezed my arm and whispered, "I love you, Dad." Maybe that phone call was just pre-wedding nerves. Maybe everything would be fine. The reception at the Ritz-Carlton was like stepping into a different world. Crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, a string quartet playing classical music I didn't recognize. The ballroom was elegant beyond anything I'd ever experienced, and for the first hour, I actually felt proud that my money had paid for all this beauty. I made an effort to mingle with Brandon's family, but the conversations were stilted. His father, Richard Whitmore, was a hedge fund manager who spoke in financial terms I didn't understand. His mother, Catherine, was perfectly polite but clearly sizing me up like I was an interesting specimen she'd found under a microscope. "So, Roderick, Sarah tells us you're in construction," Richard said during cocktail hour. "That must be quite different from the professional world she's entered." "It's honest work," I replied. "Someone's got to build the buildings where everyone else works." Catherine smiled, that thin smile wealthy people perfect. "Of course. Manual labor is so important. We have several contractors who maintain our properties in the Hamptons." I wasn't stupid. I could hear the condescension wrapped in politeness. To them, I wasn't Sarah's father who'd sacrificed everything for her success. I was just the help. During dinner, I watched Sarah work the room like the accomplished professional she'd become. She moved from table to table, charming Brandon's business associates, laughing at their jokes, fitting seamlessly into their world. When she stopped by my table briefly, she was warm but distracted, like a politician working a campaign event. "Everything's perfect, Dad," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "Thank you for making this possible." Then she moved on to the next table, where Brandon's college friends were holding court. I heard one of them say something about marrying up, and everyone laughed, including Sarah. I told myself they weren't talking about her, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. It was during the dancing that everything went wrong. I'd been feeling off all evening, a little dizzy, a little short of breath. I'd been rationing my heart medication for 3 months to afford the wedding expenses, taking half doses to make the prescription last longer. The stress of the day, combined with the missed medications, was catching up to me. I was walking across the dance floor, heading to the restroom, when the chest pain hit like a lightning bolt. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and I went down hard on that marble floor. The crash echoed through the ballroom, and the music stopped abruptly. Lying there, looking up at the crystal chandelier spinning above me, I could hear the murmur of concerned voices, but they sounded distant, like I was underwater. My chest felt like someone was standing on it, and I couldn't catch my breath. Through the crowd of faces looking down at me, I found Sarah's eyes. She was standing maybe 10 feet away, her white dress glowing under the ballroom lights. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition, concern, and something else. Embarrassment. She took a step toward me, then stopped. Catherine Whitmore was right beside her, whispering something urgent in her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Sarah's face changing, her expression shifting from concern to calculation. The wedding photographer, who'd been capturing every moment all evening, deliberately turned away. Can't have the father of the bride's medical emergency in the wedding album. Other guests were pulling out their phones, but more to document the drama than to help. And then, in the moment that will haunt me until the day I die, Sarah straightened her dress, put on a bright smile, and walked away. She actually walked away from her father lying on the ground, choosing her social status over my life. The person who finally helped me was Jake Whitmore, Brandon's 21-year-old brother. He pushed through the crowd, knelt down beside me, and asked if I needed an ambulance. When I managed to nod, he called 911 himself, then stayed with me until the paramedics arrived. As they were loading me onto the stretcher, I heard Catherine Whitmore saying to someone, "Well, I suppose these things happen. Let's just get the music started again so we can salvage the evening." Jake rode with me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding my hand in the ambulance while the paramedics checked my vitals. This kid I barely knew was showing more concern for my welfare than my own daughter. "She'll come to the hospital," Jake said quietly. "She's just in shock. People react differently to medical emergencies." I wanted to believe him, but I knew better. The last image I had before losing consciousness was Sarah dancing with Brandon, while the paramedics wheeled me out of her perfect wedding reception. Northwestern Memorial Hospital became my world for the next 48 hours. The doctors said I'd had a mild heart attack brought on by stress and irregular medication. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require monitoring. They put me on IV medications, ran tests, and asked the same question over and over. "Is there someone we should call?" I gave them Sarah's number, her home number, her cell phone, even the number for her law firm. But as the hours passed with no response, I started making excuses for her. Maybe she was still dealing with wedding cleanup. Maybe she and Brandon had left for their honeymoon early. Maybe the hospital couldn't reach her. The nurses were kind but confused. "Honey, are you sure you gave us the right numbers for your daughter?" one asked Tuesday morning. "We've called several times but keep getting voicemail." "She's probably traveling," I lied. "You know how it is with newlyweds." Jake visited Monday evening, bringing flowers he'd bought in the hospital gift shop and a get-well card signed by several of Brandon's college friends. He looked uncomfortable in his expensive suit, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "How are you feeling, Mr. Thompson?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Better. The medication is helping." I gestured to the IV drip. "Just need to rest a few days." Jake nodded, then looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. I wanted to apologize for what happened at the reception. How people reacted, I mean. "You have nothing to apologize for. You're the only one who helped me." "That's exactly why I'm apologizing." Jake's jaw was tight with anger. "The way everyone just stood there, like you were disrupting their party, instead of having a medical emergency. It was disgusting." I studied this young man's face. He had the same features as Brandon, but there was something different in his eyes. Character, maybe. Decency. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Did the wedding continue after I left?" He looked down at his hands. Mr. Thompson, please. I need to know. Jake sighed deeply. The music started again about 10 minutes after the ambulance left. Sarah made a brief announcement that you were fine and going to the hospital as a precaution. Then she and Brandon had their first dance. The reception went until midnight. Each word hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had stood up in front of 200 people and announced that I was fine without knowing my condition, without calling the hospital, without caring enough to find out. Did she ask about me at all? Jake's silence was answer enough, but he eventually spoke. I heard her talking to my parents later. She said she was grateful the emergency hadn't ruined the wedding, and that she was sure you'd understand why she couldn't leave her own reception. I closed my eyes, feeling more pain than any heart attack could cause. My daughter had chosen her social image over my life, and she'd done it without a moment's hesitation. There's something else, Jake said quietly. Something I heard my family talking about at the reception after you left. They'd been making jokes all week about you, calling you the construction worker father, and placing bets on whether you'd embarrass Sarah somehow. And she was laughing along with them, Mr. Thompson. She was part of it. The heart monitor beeped faster as my blood pressure spiked. A nurse appeared immediately, checking my vitals with concern. I'm sorry, Jake said quickly. I shouldn't have told you that. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. No. I'm glad you told me. I took deep breaths, trying to calm down. I needed to hear it. Jake stayed for another hour, telling me about his college classes and his plans to study social work instead of following his family into finance. When he left, he promised to visit again, and I believed he meant it. This kid had more integrity in his little finger than my own daughter had in her entire body. Tuesday morning came with no word from Sarah. The discharge nurse, an older woman named Patricia, who reminded me of Margaret, seemed genuinely concerned about my home situation. Are you sure you'll have help at home? She asked while reviewing my medication schedule. You really shouldn't be alone for the first few days. My daughter will check on me. I lied again. That's good. Make sure someone can drive you to your follow-up appointment Thursday. These medications can make you dizzy. I took a taxi home to my empty house in Rogers Park, the same house where Sarah had grown up, where Margaret and I had built our life together. Walking through the front door, still wearing the hospital bracelet, I felt the weight of complete solitude. The mailbox was overflowing with bills and advertisements. The wedding gifts Sarah and Brandon had asked guests to send to my house were stacked on the front porch, getting soaked by Monday night's rain. Even their wedding presents weren't important enough for her to collect. I sat in my old recliner, the one Margaret used to curl up next to while we watched evening television. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. This was my reward for 25 years of single parenthood, for bankrupting myself to give her every advantage, for loving her more than my own life. At 11:30 Tuesday morning, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw Sarah's silver BMW, the one she'd bought with her first law firm bonus. My heart jumped despite everything. Maybe Jake was wrong. Maybe she did care. Sarah rang the doorbell instead of using her key, like she was visiting a stranger instead of her childhood home. When I opened the door, she looked radiant, glowing with post-wedding happiness. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she was wearing a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Dad. She hugged me briefly, a careful embrace that wouldn't wrinkle her clothes. How are you feeling? I heard you had a little episode at the reception. A little episode. Like I'd spilled wine on the tablecloth instead of having a heart attack. I'm better now. They kept me in the hospital for 2 days. Oh, that's good. I mean that you're better. I was so worried. But Brandon said these things usually aren't serious at your age. She walked into the living room like she owned the place, settling onto the couch with practiced grace. The wedding was absolutely perfect, Dad. Everyone said it was the most beautiful reception they'd ever attended. I sat back down in my recliner, studying this stranger who looked like my daughter. She was talking about seating arrangements and flower arrangements and how impressed Brandon's family had been with the venue choice. Like I hadn't been there. Like I hadn't paid for every single detail she was gushing about. Catherine Whitmore pulled me aside and said the ballroom looked like something from a magazine, Sarah continued. And the catering was flawless. You really outdid yourself, Dad. Sarah, I interrupted. I was in the hospital for 2 days. Did you know that? Of course I knew. Jake told us you were fine, just some stress-related thing. I wanted to visit, but we had the gift opening brunch Sunday morning, and then Brandon and I took a little mini honeymoon up to Lake Geneva. Just 2 nights. But it was so romantic. She said it so casually. Like visiting her father in the hospital was less important than opening wedding presents and playing honeymooner. I felt something cold settling in my chest, colder than any heart attack. The nurses called you several times. Did they? I probably didn't get the messages. You know how crazy wedding weekends are. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages with a little frown. I've been so busy with thank you notes and getting back to work. Speaking of which, I have something exciting to tell you. The change in her tone set off alarm bells. This was her lawyer voice, the one she used when she was about to negotiate something. Brandon's family has presented us with an incredible opportunity, she said, leaning forward with practiced enthusiasm. Richard has a business deal that's absolutely guaranteed to pay off, but they need some additional capital to make it work. It's a real estate development project in Connecticut, luxury condominiums that are going to sell for millions. I stared at my daughter, not believing what I was hearing. The thing is, they need $50,000 to secure the best units before they go to market. Richard said we'd triple our investment within 18 months, maybe sooner. It's a family-only opportunity, Dad. They're only offering it to us because I'm part of the family now. $50,000. The exact amount I'd borrowed against my house to pay for her wedding. This is our chance to really set ourselves up financially, Sarah continued, her eyes bright with greed. Brandon and I could buy a house in Winnetka, maybe start thinking about children. But we need to act fast. Richard needs the money by Friday to hold our spot. I sat there in my hospital bracelet, in the house I'd mortgaged for her happiness, listening to my daughter ask me for the money I didn't have after spending my life savings on her wedding. The daughter who hadn't visited me in the hospital, who'd walked away when I collapsed, who'd called me an embarrassment to her new in-laws. Sarah, I said quietly, open my purse. Sarah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What purse, Dad? You don't carry a purse. I pointed to the coffee table, where a small black leather handbag sat among the scattered get well cards from Jake and a few neighbors. It was Margaret's purse, the one she'd carried every Sunday to church, the one that still smelled faintly of her favorite perfume after all these years. I kept it as a connection to her memory, with a few of her personal items still inside. Mom's purse? Dad, why do you want me to open Mom's purse? Sarah's voice had that carefully controlled tone she used when she thought someone was being irrational. Just open it, please. Sarah sighed, clearly humoring what she thought was some kind of grief-induced confusion. She picked up the small handbag and unzipped it with the kind of patience you'd show a confused elderly relative. The first thing she pulled out was a folded piece of paper. She glanced at it casually, then her face went white as she actually read what it said. It was my bank statement from last Friday, showing my checking account balance. $1,237. The only money I had left in the world after paying for her perfect wedding. Dad, I don't understand. Why is your bank statement in Mom's purse? Keep looking. The second item was a small digital voice recorder, the kind court reporters use. Margaret had bought it years ago when she was taking a correspondence course, and I'd found it in her dresser after she died. Sarah held it up with growing confusion. What is this? Press play. Sarah's thumb found the play button, and suddenly the room filled with her own voice from 3 weeks ago. Brandon, I'm serious. We need to talk about the wedding logistics. I'm getting really anxious about your family meeting my dad. I mean, I love him, but he's so blue-collar, you know? The color drained completely from Sarah's face as she listened to herself laugh about how embarrassing I was, how I'd show up in a cheap suit and start talking about construction projects with Brandon's wealthy father. She heard herself planning to minimize my presence, to seat me at a back table away from the important guests, to coach me on what I could and couldn't talk about. Dad, "I can explain," she started, but I held up my hand. "There's more." The third item was my hospital discharge papers, clearly marked with the diagnosis: acute myocardial infarction caused by stress and medication irregularity. The papers that showed I'd had a real heart attack, not a little episode. The papers that detailed how skipping my heart medication to afford her wedding had nearly killed me. Sarah's hands were shaking now, as she read through the medical documents. "Dad, I didn't know it was this serious. Nobody told me you had an actual heart attack. You didn't ask. You didn't call the hospital. You didn't visit. You went to Lake Geneva while your father was in cardiac care. But Jake said you were fine." Jake is a 21-year-old kid who is trying to be kind. He's not a doctor, Sarah. You're a lawyer. You know how to get information when you want it. Sarah sat back on the couch, still holding the evidence of her betrayal. The recording was still playing, and we both heard her laugh again as she talked about being embarrassed by her blue-collar father. "I was nervous," she said weakly. "Wedding planning is stressful, and I was trying to fit in with Brandon's family. I didn't mean any of it. You meant all of it. And that's not even the worst part." Sarah looked up from the hospital papers with genuine fear in her eyes now. "What do you mean?" I reached into the side pocket of my recliner and pulled out a second voice recorder, this one still running with its red light blinking. "I've been recording our conversation today, too." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd just said, every casual dismissal of my heart attack, every greedy word about the $50,000 investment opportunity, every moment where she'd shown more concern for thank you notes than her father's health, it was all captured. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I wanted proof of who you really are. The daughter who'll walk away from her father's medical emergency but show up 2 days later, asking for money. The daughter who calls her father an embarrassment but expects him to mortgage his house for her husband's business deals." Sarah started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. "Dad, please. If Brandon's family hears this, if they find out how I talked about you, they'll think I'm awful. His mother already has concerns about our different backgrounds. Now you're worried about what they'll think? You don't understand. Brandon's family is very traditional, very focused on family values and respect for elders. If they hear these recordings, especially the one where I'm asking for money while you're wearing a hospital bracelet, they'll realize they're not gaining a daughter, they're gaining a gold digger." Sarah flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair, Dad. I love Brandon. Do you? Or do you love his trust fund and his family's connections? Both can be true." At least she was being honest now. I studied my daughter's face, looking for any trace of the little girl who used to make me Father's Day cards with construction paper and glitter. That child was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating woman who measured relationships by their financial value. "Sarah, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want a completely honest answer. If I gave you the $50,000 right now, when would I see you again?" She opened her mouth to answer quickly, then stopped. We both knew the truth. If I handed over the money, she'd disappear back into her new life with Brandon's family, calling occasionally out of obligation but never really including me in her world. "I'd visit you, Dad. We'd stay close." "Like you stayed close this weekend?" Silence. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "Those recordings I just showed you are going to Brandon's family. They're going to hear exactly who they're welcoming into their family." "Dad, no. Please, you can't do that. It'll ruin everything." "What exactly will it ruin, Sarah? Your marriage based on lies? Your new social status built on rejecting the man who raised you? Your chance to get rich off your in-laws' money? It'll ruin my life, like you ruined mine when you walked away from my heart attack." Sarah was sobbing now, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, nothing. This wasn't my daughter anymore. This was a stranger who happened to share my DNA and my late wife's eyes. "I can change," she said desperately. "I can be better." I was just confused about how to balance two different worlds. "No, Sarah. You weren't confused. You made a choice. You chose money over family, status over love, image over integrity, and you made that choice clearly and deliberately. I stood up from my recliner, feeling more energy than I'd had in days. Those recordings are already sent. The silence that followed my words was absolute. Sarah stared at me with complete incomprehension, like I'd just told her the sun was green. What do you mean, already sent? While you were driving over here, gushing about your mini honeymoon, and planning to ask for money, I was emailing audio files. Brandon has them. Richard and Catherine have them. I sent copies to Brandon's brother Jake, who's been more of a family member to me this week than you have. I also sent them to the partners at Morrison, Bradley, and Associates, since your professional reputation seems so important to you. Sarah's phone started buzzing immediately, like I'd triggered some kind of electronic avalanche. She pulled it out with shaking hands, seeing call after call from Brandon, his parents, her law firm. The screen was lighting up with text messages faster than she could read them. Dad, how could you do this to me? How could I do this to you? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, you did this to yourself. I just provided the evidence. Her phone rang with Brandon's ringtone. She answered it with desperate hope in her voice. Brandon, honey, I can explain everything. Those recordings, they're taken out of context. Even from across the room, I could hear Brandon's voice through the phone, loud and angry. Sarah's face crumpled as he spoke. No, Brandon, please. Don't listen to your parents. We can work this out. What do you mean, embarrassed? I was just nervous about the wedding. Brandon? He'd hung up. Sarah stared at her phone like it had betrayed her, then immediately called back. It went straight to voicemail. This isn't happening, she whispered. This can't be happening. But it was happening, faster than either of us had expected. Her phone rang again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Yes, this is Sarah Whitmore. I mean Sarah Thompson Whitmore. What? No, I don't think a partnership review is necessary. I understand your concerns about character and integrity, but another hang-up. Another look of devastation. My law firm, she explained numbly. They're calling an emergency partners meeting to discuss whether my behavior reflects the firm's values. Apparently, someone forwarded them the recording where I'm asking for money while you're in a hospital bracelet. Lawyers care about ethics, I said. Who knew? Sarah's phone rang a third time. This one she answered with genuine fear. Mrs. Whitmore, Catherine. Please, let me explain. What? Disinvited from Sunday dinner? But we've been planning that all month. I see. Yes, I understand your position about family values. When that call ended, Sarah finally looked at me with something approaching understanding. They're cutting me off. All of them. Brandon's family thinks I'm a fortune hunter, and Brandon is talking about getting the marriage annulled. My law firm is questioning my character and fitness. In one afternoon, you've destroyed everything I've worked for. No, Sarah. Your own words destroyed it. I just made sure the right people heard them. She sat in silence for a long moment, scrolling through text messages that were clearly making everything worse. Finally, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Was this revenge? For the wedding? This wasn't revenge. This was truth. For 25 years, you've been able to manipulate me with tears and promises and declarations of love, but you couldn't manipulate those recordings. They show exactly who you are when you think no one important is listening. So what happens now? I lose everything, and you feel satisfied? I don't feel satisfied, Sarah. I feel sad. I feel like I failed as a father, because I raised a daughter who thinks love means money and family means convenience. Her phone buzzed with another text message. She glanced at it and winced. Jake? Jake says he's disappointed in me. Jake, who barely knows me, is disappointed in how I treated my own father. She looked up with genuine confusion. He says he's more proud to know you than he is to know me. Jake has character. Real character. Not the fake kind you perform for cameras and cocktail parties. Sarah's phone went quiet for the first time in an hour. In the silence, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the same clock that had marked time through Margaret's illness, through Sarah's childhood, through all the years when our family meant something real. Dad, she said finally, what would it take for you to forgive me? I don't know if forgiveness is possible here, Sarah. You didn't just hurt me. You showed me that our entire relationship has been a lie. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every time you called me the man who made this possible, you were just managing me. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my health before today? When was the last time you visited this house when you didn't need something? When was the last time you treated me like family, instead of like an obligation? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. We both knew she couldn't give me a single example. I thought so. Her phone started ringing again, but this time she didn't answer it. She just sat there, holding the device that had brought her world crashing down, looking around the living room where she'd grown up. I remember sitting right here doing homework while you cooked dinner, she said quietly. You'd help me with math problems even though you'd been working construction all day, and your hands were so tired you could barely hold a pencil. I remember that too. I remember you staying up all night when I had the flu, bringing me soup and checking my temperature every hour. You were 8. You kept asking for your mother. I remember you crying at my high school graduation because you said I was the first Thompson to graduate with honors. You were. I was so proud. Sarah looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine emotion instead of practiced manipulation. When did I stop being that person? When did I become someone who walks away from her father's heart attack? I think it happened gradually. Success changed you, money changed you. Or maybe you were always this person, and I just didn't want to see it. Can I become someone different? I don't know, that's up to you. Her phone had stopped ringing, but we both knew the damage was done. By tomorrow, everyone in her carefully constructed new world would know exactly what kind of person she really was. The question was what she'd do with that knowledge. The next few hours unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Sarah sat on my couch, alternately crying and making phone calls that went nowhere. Brandon wouldn't answer. His parents had blocked her number. Her law firm colleagues were avoiding her calls. Even her college friends, who'd received copies of the recordings through social media connections, were maintaining careful distance. 24 hours ago, I was Mrs. Brandon Whitmore, with a corner office and a trust fund, she said bitterly. Now I'm Sarah Thompson again, facing a potential ethics review and a marriage that might not survive the week. Money comes and goes, Sarah. Character is what lasts. Easy for you to say. You're not losing everything you've worked for. I studied my daughter's face, looking for any sign that she understood what she'd actually lost. Not the money or the status, but the relationship with the one person who'd loved her unconditionally for 28 years. What exactly did you work for? I asked. The law degree I paid for? The professional connections you made through charm and manipulation? The marriage to a man whose family you planned to use for money? I worked for respect. I worked for a place in the world where people would take me seriously. And you thought the only way to earn respect was to be ashamed of where you came from. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went even paler. Brandon wants to meet for coffee tomorrow. He says we need to discuss the future of our relationship. She looked up at me with desperate hope. Maybe I can explain everything. Maybe I can make him understand that I was just nervous. Sarah, stop. Just stop. Stop what? Stop trying to manipulate your way out of the consequences of your actions. You're sitting here planning your next performance instead of thinking about what you've done wrong. I know what I did wrong. I said terrible things about you. I walked away when you needed help. I came here asking for money while you were still recovering. I know all of that. Do you? Or do you just know you got caught? The question hung in the air between us. Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time all day, she was actually thinking instead of just reacting. I don't know, she admitted finally. I honestly don't know the difference anymore. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said since walking through my door. When I was growing up, she continued slowly, I was so proud of you. I'd bragged to my friends about how hard you worked, how you were building our house with your own hands, how you never missed a school play or parent conference even when you were exhausted. What changed? Law school, I think. Being around people who had so much more than we did. Hearing classmates talk about their parents' careers, their family vacations to Europe, their trust funds and connections. I started feeling embarrassed about our little house, about your work clothes, about how you'd show up to school events still covered in sawdust. So you decided to reinvent yourself. I decided to become someone worthy of the opportunities you'd given me. Someone who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. And you thought that meant rejecting me. Sarah was crying again. But these tears seemed different. Less calculated, more real. I thought if I could just get established enough, make enough money, marry into the right family, then I could bring you into that world with me. Like I could elevate both of us. By being ashamed of me first? By being successful first. I thought success would give me the power to make people respect you. I felt a flash of the old protective love I'd carried for her since childhood. She was still so naive about how the world worked, still believing that other people's opinions mattered more than her own integrity. Sarah, people like Brandon's family will never respect me, no matter how successful you become. And that's fine. I don't need their respect. But I wanted them to see what I saw. How generous you are, how hard you work, how much you've sacrificed. They don't care about any of that. They care about money and status and keeping people like me in our place. The only way to earn their approval is to become like them, and that's what I did. That's what you tried to do. But you can't become something you're not without losing something you are. Sarah's phone rang again. This time, she looked at the caller ID and answered immediately. Jake? Yes, I know you're disappointed in me. What? You want to what? She listened for several minutes, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something that might have been hope. You want to bring Brandon over here tonight? To talk to my father? Jake, I don't think that's a good idea. No, I understand you're trying to help, but… Okay, if you think it might help. She hung up and looked at me with uncertain eyes. Jake convinced Brandon to come over tonight. He wants Brandon to hear your side of the story, to understand what kind of man you really are. He thinks if Brandon sees past his parents' prejudices, maybe we can work something out. And what do you think? I think Jake is a better person than any of us deserve. We sat in silence as the afternoon faded into evening. Sarah helped me heat up some soup for dinner, the first meal we'd shared in my house since before the wedding. It was strange, having her in Margaret's kitchen, remembering all the times the three of us had sat around that small table planning Sarah's future. Dad, she said as we were finishing dinner, regardless of what happens with Brandon, I want you to know something. Those things I said on the recording, about being embarrassed by you, they weren't true. Not really. They felt true when you said them. They felt necessary. I thought I had to choose between loving you and fitting in with them. I thought I couldn't have both. You were right. You can't. Sarah looked up from her soup with surprise. What do you mean? You can't love someone and be ashamed of them at the same time. You can't build a relationship on lies and expect it to last. Brandon's family was never going to accept you as you really are, which means they were never going to accept me either. So what should I have done? Been proud of who you are and where you came from. Told them about the father who worked 3 jobs to pay for your education. Made them respect me by respecting me yourself. And if they didn't like it, then they weren't worthy of you. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Through the window, I could see Jake's car in the driveway, with Brandon sitting stiffly in the passenger seat. This is it, Sarah said nervously. My last chance to save my marriage. No, I corrected her. This is your first chance to tell the truth. Jake knocked on the door like he'd been visiting for years instead of days. When I opened it, he smiled warmly and shook my hand, then stepped aside to let Brandon enter. My new son-in-law looked like he was attending a funeral instead of a family meeting. Mr. Thompson, Brandon said stiffly, thank you for agreeing to see us. Have a seat, both of you. Sarah's made coffee. We arranged ourselves awkwardly in the living room, Brandon and Jake on the couch, Sarah in Margaret's old chair, me in my recliner. For a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Jake broke the silence. Mr. Thompson, Brandon has some things he'd like to say to you. About the wedding, about the recordings, About everything. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of his element. I want to apologize for my family's behavior at the wedding. The way they talked about you, the way they treated your medical emergency, it was unconscionable. Apology accepted. I also want you to know that I had no idea Sarah felt embarrassed by you. If I'd known she was saying those things, I would have stopped her immediately. Sarah started to speak, but Brandon held up his hand. I'm not finished. Sarah, what you said on those recordings, the way you talked about your father who sacrificed everything for your success, it showed me a side of you I'd never seen before. And frankly, it's not a side I can respect. Brandon, please. But, he continued, looking directly at me, spending time with Jake this week, hearing him talk about the man who helped him at the wedding while his own family stood around taking pictures, made me realize something important. Character isn't about money or social status. It's about how you treat people when nobody's watching. Jake nodded encouragingly. Tell him what you told me in the car. Brandon took a deep breath. Mr. Thompson, I've spent my whole life around wealthy people who think money makes them better than everyone else. My parents, their friends, most of my college buddies. They judge people by their bank accounts and their zip codes. But you raised a daughter who became a successful lawyer through your hard work and sacrifice. That's more impressive than anything my trust fund has ever accomplished. I found myself genuinely surprised. This wasn't what I'd expected from Brandon. The recordings showed me who Sarah becomes when she's trying to fit into my world, he continued. But Jake told me who she used to be before she met me. Someone who was proud of her father. Someone who talked about your work ethic and your integrity. I want to meet that person again. Sarah was crying quietly. But for once, I thought the tears might be real. Sarah, Brandon said, turning to his wife. I love you, but I can't be married to someone who's ashamed of where she came from. If you want our marriage to work, you need to decide who you really are. I know who I am, Sarah said softly. I'm Roderick Thompson's daughter. I'm the little girl who used to wait by the window for her dad to come home from work. I'm the person who got into law school because her father believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. She looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Dad, I've been trying to become someone else for so long, I forgot who I really was. I thought success meant leaving my past behind, but I was wrong. Success means honoring the people who made it possible. Brandon reached over and took her hand. That's the woman I fell in love with. Jake smiled broadly. And that's the sister-in-law I want to have. Over the next several hours, something remarkable happened. We talked. Really talked. Like family members instead of strangers. Brandon asked me about construction work. About raising Sarah alone. About Margaret's death. He listened like he genuinely cared about the answers. Sarah told stories about our Sunday dinners. About how I'd taught her to drive in the high school parking lot. About how proud she'd been when her friends met me. The real memories, not the sanitized version she'd been presenting to Brandon's family. Jake talked about his decision to study social work instead of finance. About how meeting me had reinforced his belief that meaningful work mattered more than profitable work. He said my example had given him courage to disappoint his parents' expectations. Around midnight, Brandon and Sarah prepared to leave. At the door, Brandon shook my hand again. Mr. Thompson, I hope you'll give me a chance to earn your respect. I want to be the kind of man who deserves to be part of your family. You already are, son. Sarah hugged me last, a real embrace that lasted longer than any we'd shared in years. I love you, Dad, not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. 6 months later, our family looks completely different. Sarah and Brandon moved into a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, instead of buying a mansion in Winnetka. Sarah left Morrison, Bradley, and Associates to work for a legal aid clinic, using her law degree to help people who remind her of her father. Brandon took a job with a nonprofit investment firm that focuses on affordable housing development. They're happier now than they ever were trying to impress people who didn't really care about them. Sarah visits me twice a week, and we're rebuilding the relationship we lost when success went to her head. Jake comes by regularly too. He's dating Sarah now, which creates some family complications but feels right in a way that her marriage to Brandon never did. Brandon and Sarah had their marriage annulled by mutual consent, remaining friends but acknowledging they'd married for the wrong reasons. My health has improved dramatically since I went back on my proper medication schedule. Sarah insists on paying for my prescriptions now, not as charity but as a way of taking care of the man who took care of her. The most important change is in how Sarah presents herself to the world. She talks proudly about her blue-collar father, about growing up in a working-class household, about the values that shaped her character. She's learned that respect earned through honesty is worth more than approval gained through deception. Sometimes people need to lose everything to find out what really matters. Sarah lost her money, her status, and her carefully constructed image. But she found something more valuable. She found herself, and she found her way back to family. The lesson here isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about truth and consequences. When we build our lives on lies, even comfortable lies, eventually reality comes calling. Sarah thought she could hide her origins and manipulate her way to happiness. But authentic relationships require authentic people. Love without respect is empty. Success without integrity is hollow. Family bonds based on convenience, rather than genuine care, will break under pressure. But when we have the courage to be honest about who we are and where we come from, we can build relationships that last. I learned something too. Enabling bad behavior isn't loving, it's harmful. By always rescuing Sarah from the consequences of her choices, I'd prevented her from developing real character. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the truth about themselves. Today, Sarah is a better person than she was as Brandon's wife. She's more honest, more grateful, more aware of how her actions affect others. She still makes mistakes, but now she takes responsibility for them instead of making excuses. Our family may look different than it did a year ago, but it's stronger now because it's built on truth instead of pretense. And that's worth more than all the trust funds and country club memberships in the world. I want to hear from you about this story. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and social acceptance? How do you handle relationships with people who seem ashamed of your background? What would you do if someone you loved was using you for money while treating you with disrespect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you think about your own family relationships, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to hear more stories about real people facing difficult choices and finding their way back to what really matters. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that authentic love and genuine respect are the only foundations strong enough to build a lasting family on.